everyone, we are here at the Atlantic Forage Field Day in Nepean. It's put on by the Maritime Beef Council and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. We're going to capture Kim Schneider's presentation on grazing cover crops. Kim is an assistant professor at the University of Guelph and focuses on the benefits provided by forages. This topic of grazing cover crops fits perfectly under the off-CAF or on-farm climate action fund's beneficial management practices. This includes nitrogen management, cover cropping, and rotational grazing. Keep watching to learn more.
It's been quite fun being here today, so thank you for the organizing committee for inviting me, and also thank you to Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's Agricultural Climate Solutions, the off-CAF program, On-Farm Climate Action Fund, for providing some funding to support my travel to be here today. So yes, I'm Kim Schneider. I am an assistant professor at the University of Guelph. I work in the Department of Plant Agriculture. I have a background more in soils and environmental science and agronomy, and now I'm focusing on forages and cover crops. I do a little bit of work also on carbon sequestration in grazing systems, nutrient management, how can we be more nutrient use efficient. A lot of my research focuses on trying to identify where we can have those win-win situations of being more, providing some improved economics in terms of cost of production to producers, but also improving environmental outcomes at the same time. And I think forages, I'm a fan of forages in general. I think most of you are. I think they provide a lot of ecosystem services to society. So that's one reason that I really enjoy researching them. And the livestock go along with that. So livestock, just by having forages in the landscape, add a lot of services. So today we're going to look at, these are kind of my 5 topics. We'll talk about why would you graze cover crops. I'm going to look at cover crops for grazing in the fall, cover crops for spring grazing. This is all Ontario data, so I'm not sure how applicable it will be, but hopefully there's some interesting tidbits there. I've also like to say I've only really been doing this work for a couple of years, so definitely don't claim to be an expert in cover crop grazing, but I appreciate the opportunity to present the data that we do have. I'm also involved in a Living Labs project, but it's just in the first year, so I will outline a bit about that as well. It's focusing on grazing cover crops. And then obviously I'll try to summarize at the end for you some key takeaway points. Okay, so why graze cover crops? So maybe if I could just get a show of hands, how many people here are producers? Okay, and what about if I said dairy producers specifically? I know there was, good, I was talking to him earlier. What about beef producers? Okay, a few more. Sheep, anyone? Okay. How about cash crops, annual row crops? Couple. Okay. Is anyone growing cover crops? And which ones? Do you want to?
Which ones?
Yeah. What type of cover crop?
Common veg.
Okay. So a diverse mix, lots of species. Anyone else want to add anything? Okay. And is anyone grazing cover crops? You again, yeah. And so a couple. So why do you graze cover crops? What would be some of your main reasons for doing so?
It's because it's part of our rotation. So if I have a plot with issues like weed pressures, and I'm taking that out of perennial pasture, then I still need that land base to provide feed for the animals, so I put a cover crop on it.
Okay, so it fits, yeah.
The soil, fix the problem, and then graze it.
Okay. And how about you? Sorry to pick on you, but
stockpiling my perennial pastures for later grazing, so I'm extending the grazing season by.
So spring cover crop are you grazing?
Sorghum. So it's
Sorry.
part of a neighbor's potato
Okay,
rotation.
okay.
It's his land. I just graze it.
Okay.
Save my home time.
Okay, so it's a warm season. Okay. So today, I mean, I have some reasons I've come up with. There's many different reasons for grazing cover crops. I think one of the big ones is extending the grazing season. So in Ontario, probably grazing cover crops in the fall is the most popular, but there's also some interest in spring grazing. Obviously, keeping animals outside where the cost of feeding them is lower. Again, not my focus here today, but improved animal welfare, just again, keeping them outside for longer. This one may be a little bit more Ontario specific, but some producers are grazing just because if they can partner with an annual cash crop grower, they can have more land available. And I think this is common with sheep producers in Ontario. They also like it because they can get to new land that, you know, if parasites are an issue with sheep, they can get onto new land. Just having the cover crop, if you're growing a cover crop, and now you can have a dual purpose and get some grazing out of it. Some people harvest it for forage, but it can increase cover crop adoption with cash crop growers. I'm not sure how much weight this one has, but cleaning up residue on the field, some producers like that. Of course, cattle can be selective, so depending how you manage them, that may work better in some situations than others. Providing emergency feed. This is one, maybe you have some winter kill of your perennial pastures, or maybe it is in the summer and there's a drought. But we're starting to get an interest, and we don't have a lot of data on this, on being able to increase soil health on annual cropland. So having that cover crop there might be one step to increase soil health, but then grazing it may be the next step. And so there is interest. Some producers jumping on this faster than others, of course. Right? Yeah, and so not so much, yeah. Yeah, and no, I mean, not so much as harvesting, because if you're removing that as silage or something, you're removing those nutrients. But I guess we don't know. And so that's what the Living Labs project will be working on. We'll be comparing soil health with grazed versus ungrazed cover crops. Okay, so and then I think just increasing nutrient and land use efficiencies. If we can make better use of the land, so if we have annual crops growing there and we can tighten up that nutrient cycling. I think in Ontario, again, this is a big one because of the cost of land. Maybe it's $30,000 an acre, and now our cow-calf producers are saying, well, we can't really survive economically, but maybe if we can grow some cash crops and keep our animals on the land with having cover crops in there, it could be a viable option. And finally, I guess we don't have a lot of data on this, but potentially just by keeping the animals outside for longer, we could reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Maybe they're being fed less grain and more on pasture. And then again, maybe we need a little bit less energy in terms of spreading manure, adding nutrients, etc. I also wanted to highlight here, and this isn't really a shout out to General Mills specifically, but they had this nice diagram here with the 5 core principles of regenerative agriculture. And I know there's a lot of mixed feelings about that term, whether or not you like that term or not, it's around. So the 5 main principles include minimizing soil disturbance, maximizing crop diversity, keeping the soil covered, maintaining living roots year-round. So something that forages do perfectly, but cover crops may be the next best thing in an annual crop rotation. And the last one is integrating livestock. So this is something that, just growing a cover crop on its own doesn't do, but adding that grazing component in does. So I know we went through a ton of reasons. I think we can kind of lump some of the reasons into two main groups, and that maybe there's some increased cost efficiencies by grazing cover crops. Also, we could increase our nutrient and land use efficiencies. So again, this is has the potential for an economic and environmental win-win situation. So what do we know about grazing cover crops? Well, there's not really a lot of data from Canadian trials yet. So I am going to walk you through some of the data we do have. Firstly, focusing on cover crops for fall grazing. Some of these are from plot trials, just looking at potential species you might use, their quality. And then we do have a little bit of 2 years of grazing experience. But again, this is popular in Ontario. This is where it fits in the rotation. We have sort of in year one, often there's corn is grown and it's harvested a little bit late in the season and it's difficult to put a cover crop in. So often some people may put fall rye, but that's not the norm. Often there's a fallow winter and then soybeans is planted the next year. Definitely some people still just plant corn, soy, but winter wheat has been added into the rotation as a step to kind of improve crop diversity, improve soil health a little bit. So winter wheat has pretty much mostly been all harvested at this point in time in the last couple weeks in Ontario. So we have this season available for a cover crop, kind of August, September, even into October, where we can have some crop growth. So the first trial I just want to mention, this is a plot-based trial and it's funded actually from grain farmers, that should say, Grain Farmers of Ontario and OMAFRA. And this was specifically looking at legume-based cover crops, if they were planted in a monoculture or in mixtures. I won't get into there was objectives beyond the scope that I'll talk about today, but we were really looking at alternative legumes to red clover, which is a popular cover crop that's frost seeded into winter wheat. So what I wanted to show in this graph, it's probably small for you at the back, but we have 3 years of data. We have the light blue, the green, and the dark blue purple color. These were our legumes. Now, we didn't expect that they would do super well legumes in monoculture, but what we were looking for as part of that trial was nitrogen credit to the next year's corn crop. I'm not going to talk about that as much today, but when we add oats into the mixture over here, we got much improved yield stability. So the legumes were really sensitive to moisture. So basically, I just wanted to use this slide to show that oats is probably the most common cover crop used in Ontario in the fall. And our data supports that it adds yield stability even in dry years, which 2022 was quite dry and it still seemed to do okay. Okay, so the next plot trial here, this is funded by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's Science Cluster Program, and so together with the Beef Cattle Research Council. We just have 1 year of data, but we were looking at the effect of different cover crop species or mixtures, along with harvest timing on cover crop yield and quality in both the fall, which I'll talk about first, and then later get to the spring. Oh no. Okay, so we had 11 different combinations ranging from oats and barley, and these slides are available to you, I think, so don't worry too much. We had oats and peas, and then we have some three-way mixtures, oat pea radish, oat soybean radish, and then some more diverse mixtures. So only 1 year of data right now. But what this is showing, it looks a bit complicated. The green is our September harvest. We harvested so these cover crops were planted early August. Our first harvest was September 23rd, and then about a month later, we have the October harvest. Not surprisingly, the yield is quite a bit higher when we wait till almost the end of October. This orangey red color here indicates we took 2 harvests. We harvested September. In that vegetative state, the October harvest, the oats have headed out. But you can still see, having just that the late harvest timing, these blue bars, are higher than even if we took 2 cuts. And I would say this agrees with what most producers are doing. Just 1 cover crop grazing, usually in October, seems to be most common producer practice. And again, this one species, again, these kind of correspond with the mixtures. All of them, I guess the other thing from this slide is that there's not a huge range in terms of, yes, they're variable in terms of the timing, but no big differences in terms of the mixtures, except for this one, which didn't have oats or barley in it. All the other ones have oats or barley in it. And so, again, there's just some evidence that having one of those cool season species in the mix adds some yield stability. So even though taking that regrowth cutting of oats and barley, it didn't add up to as much yield as if you just took 1 harvest or 1 simulated grazing later in the season, we did get quite a bit of regrowth. So this was just 6 days after the first cut, we had about 10 centimeters of regrowth. So just an example that it's not bad. And the other thing you have to consider about, what do you want this cover crop for? What type of animals are you feeding? The quality does go down the longer you wait and if you let that material go to head. So this is crude protein here in percent. With our September harvest and October harvest in blue, so higher crude protein, higher forage quality in general if you take the earlier harvest, not surprising. And those were our mean crude protein values, 16 and 13 for September and October. If we looked at the species and protein values, so here's our monoculture oats and barley, and just adding an oats and pea mixture with 30% peas into the mix, we can significantly increase the protein. And these other treatments that did well also had either oats or barley and peas in the mix. There was some other species there, but I think peas would have been the dominant legume. And that's one thing we've noticed, comparing annual legumes, peas seems to do the best. We've tested some newer annual clovers, but I would say if I had to make a recommendation, peas seems to be more reliable at this point. Okay, so getting to a grazing situation, I may move a little bit quickly through some of the methods here, but this is part of a larger project where we were looking at integrating annual forages. Is it economical for producers? So this is a real-world grazing situation. We have 6 fields. They're 8 acres each, so we have 48 acres. They are in a 2-year rotation. Sorry if I keep standing in front of the slides. We have a summer annual forage that I'm not going to talk about today, but these are their warm season species like sorghum sudan, sudan grass, millets. And then we have a winter cereal that we would plant after that, and then followed by, that would be grazed in the spring the next year, and then that would be followed by a fall annual forage, which would sort of mimic the after winter wheat cover crop timing. So the treatments that we were looking at, they were all oats based. We had oats and peas. We had oats, peas, and a brassica. We had oats, berseem clover, one of the annual clovers that we're studying, and a brassica. And then we had a 6-species diverse mixture. Oats, we added spring triticale, peas, berseem clover, brassica, and Japanese millet. So in the first, we also kind of targeted that we would graze in the more of the vegetative state when it was ready, sort of mid to late September. There was no significant difference in the yield there across the treatments, so the diverse mixture didn't really add a lot of yield compared to the oats and peas. Same thing in the second year, so that's 2 years of data. But what we did notice is the yield was like over 2 tons in the fall of 2023, and in 2022 it was less than 1 metric ton per hectare, mainly just due to moisture. Okay, we had a dry period after, so that's kind of our challenge with cover crops. It might be really dry in August when they're being planted, so that moisture really plays an effect. And I would say when we do have that moisture, like this is a picture, I don't know how well you can see it, but this is berseem clover here. And when we have a lot of moisture, it seemed to be doing quite well. Now the topic of brassicas, because you saw that we had those included in the mix. I'm sort of on the fence. I don't know which way to think about including brassicas in the mix for grazing. Happy to maybe get your thoughts after. What we noticed when we had it in an oats, pea, brassica mixture, the cattle, they'd eat all the oats and peas, and then, the brassica just stood there for a little bit, and then they'd eat it eventually. I think some producers like it for breaking up compaction, adding a bit of yield, although we didn't see numerically a yield increase here with the brassicas. We included it at 1.5 pounds per acre in the mix. I think maybe going a little bit lower. And also I've heard after frost that it becomes a little bit more palatable. So I don't know. Producers have mixed feelings about including them in the mix for grazing or not. So we did get regrowth, and we were able to get some grazing days later in the season in both 2022 and 2023. And this is where we see a little bit of an advantage for that diverse mixture. It seemed to have a little bit better regrowth, not statistically significant in 2022, but it was in 2023, and same trend happened. So I guess if you were going for that 2 grazing system, maybe having that more diverse mix could be a good thing. So I'm just going to skip over these. That just showed the total yield. Okay, so now we went through the fall grazing. We're going to look at spring grazing. So this is typically your winter cereals, fall rye probably being the most common, and then also winter triticale. So we had a similar trial where we were looking at species and mixture and also harvest timing on species that might be planted in the fall for spring forage. And in this experiment we had an open pollinated fall rye, more commonly used. We had a hybrid fall rye, winter triticale, and then we had a fall rye and hairy vetch treatment. Fall rye, hairy vetch, we had a Austrian winter pea, also included a brassica. And then the 6th one, which is hard to see, had fall rye, also winter triticale, vetch, plantain, chicory, and sweet clover. So in the spring, we had 2 harvest dates. They were just 2 weeks apart, but there's huge changes in that time. Early May, and then 2 weeks later. One thing about the brassica I'll mention, I wouldn't really probably include it again, is that it was already bolting and going to flower in the early May timing, so I think very unpalatable and would be avoided. Our other species, I think that we did have a little bit of Austrian winter pea over winter, not a lot. The hairy vetch, definitely. The plantain, chicory, and sweet clover to some extent, yes. So this is our harvest data. I don't know how you can see it at the back, but basically we have, the blue is the early date and this orange color is the later date. So we almost double our yield by waiting. However, I mean, it would have been nice to have like 1 week in between. However, things are going to head and becoming probably very low in quality, so not necessarily the best thing to do. If we look at that early harvest, I would say anything with the fall rye, there was no difference between the open pollinated and the hybrid fall rye. Triticale is a little bit lower in yield, but it matures a little bit slower than fall rye. So when we're doing our experiment and cutting all at one date, then we a little bit disadvantage the triticale. So these two mixtures had triticale and they yielded a little bit lower. At the later date, we saw all the species that had vetch in them to yield more, and there was a lot of vetch present. But the forage quality, yeah, so we have some numbers. These two slides, I don't have the stats on them. This is from this year, so I was just putting it together like last minute. But we do have some numbers that indicate kind of what we would expect: crude protein drops, that acid detergent fiber, so more indigestible material increases, and the relative forage quality decreases quite a bit. So this is a little bit busy, but when we look across species, a couple things I wanted to point out. That winter triticale, one advantage is that it kind of holds its quality a little bit longer than fall rye. You have a little bit longer window because it matures a bit slower. So a little higher crude protein. Also, the hairy vetch, being a legume, adds a little bit of protein as well. So in a grazing situation, going back to this experiment that we had with the fall annual forages and we have the winter cereals, this is the last trial I'm going to talk about. So hopefully you can bear with me just a little bit longer. We compared fall rye here, fall triticale, and then we thought, well, what if we add fall rye and oats, plant it in the fall, graze it in the fall, and then graze it again in the spring. So we had these treatments with the oats and without the oats. And then in the paddock, half of it was left ungrazed and half of it was grazed. So these were all planted end of August to early September. They were grazed mid-October in the fall and then grazed again in the spring, early May, for about a month. And we got 2 rounds of grazing in the spring. So, okay, these are the results showing, in blue it's the fall yield, yellow is the spring yield, and then the total yield is in green. Fall rye, I guess, again, maturing faster, really starts growing quickly, had the highest total yield. You can see when we had the oats in this year, we had a lot of oats growing, and I think what happened, so it actually decreased our total yield because it affected the spring yield of the winter cereal. This is a kind of an extreme picture, but the oats, some of them, I don't know if you can see it very well, but here's your fall rye, and the oats actually had a smothering effect if they didn't get all grazed down nicely, right? So maybe not the best planting the oats in that situation. And then just to give you the summary here, if we compared the grazed and ungrazed yields, So if it was fall grazed or not, the yields were not statistically different. Numerically, I guess, just slightly lower in the grazed treatment, but not different. So the second year, we had a lot, it was dry in the fall of 2022 when we planted. We couldn't graze the fall rye or fall triticale monocultures because there was barely any material at that time. The one with the oats, there was a little bit. We got a little bit more yield, but not much. So we did graze those ones. Spring yields were good. Overall, no statistical difference across the spring or total yields. Again, we did in the treatments that were grazed that the grazing didn't affect the yields the next spring. I just wanted to touch on the Living Labs project that I'm a part of. So we have a Living Labs Ontario that's headed by the Ontario Soil and Crop Improvement Association. So this project is going to look at the impact of grazing cover crops on soil health and the subsequent corn crop yield. I'm not the best with maps, so I apologize here, but basically this red dot is Toronto, we have Guelph, Collingwood. These 3 blue dots are where our 3 sheep producers are, and then we have 4 beef producers in yellow, so we have 7 producers. They're all going to have a field that basically is divided down the middle, and we will have a grazed section and an ungrazed section. And we're just starting to take our baseline soil samples over the next month. The cover crops are being planted, and they'll be grazed this October. And then we will take soil samples after they're grazed and also the next spring. So we're going to look at a whole slew of soil properties, but definitely soil health indicators, including aggregate stability, compaction. I think there's a lot of interest in the inorganic nitrogen. So does that grazing of the cover crop convert that material into more available form? So we'll look at potentially mineralizable nitrogen, maybe some different carbon fractions, respiration, ACE protein. And we'll also, if we hope to look at soil moisture and temperature effects, and we'll take cover crop biomass quality measurements and then grain yield of the corn the next year. Okay, so this kind of brings me to the summary of the presentation. I know there's a lot of different information there, but basically for fall grazed cover crops, we found that oats and barley, it's just not as commonly used, and I think sometimes the awns are less palatable for cattle or sheep, but they increase the yield and yield stability in fall cover crops. Adding a legume to the mixture, I mean, just having a simple mixture like oats and peas can help your quality. Greater yields were achieved with one later harvest, but the quality will be lower, so I guess it depends who you're feeding and what you need. If you're going for 2 harvest system, the diverse mixture may yield more overall. And finally, just a mixed opinion on brassicas. Maybe they could be included at a low seeding rate. For the spring grazed cover crops, like those winter cereal mixtures, no difference in yield for open pollinated versus versus a hybrid fall rye. Hairy vetch over winters with fall rye or triticale, increasing the yield and forage quality. I know there's some concerns about toxicity from hairy vetch. I think in a mixture that it's okay. I haven't heard any bad stories. I'm happy to chat with you further if anyone knows about that. Winter triticale, it has a delayed maturity, keeps forage quality for longer. I think one of the challenges for us is we're trying to extend the grazing season in Ontario, and so by planting that fall cereal, we were finding the ground was still wet, and we basically, when we could put them out on the fall cereal, we could put them out on the perennial pasture, so it wasn't a huge advantage in extending the grazing season. A moderate fall grazing did not impact the yield of winter cereals in the spring. And planting oats with fall rye or fall triticale did not lead to significant yield increases, but it could be an option if you want more of that fall grazing as opposed to the spring. And finally, so we've seen there's many reasons for grazing cover crops. And I think the interest is growing in terms of, can grazing cover crops increase soil health? I know our producers, they would like to have like a fact sheet that they can take to their cash crop neighbors and say, look, if I can graze your cover crop, maybe it's a good thing, it's not gonna hurt. Some farmers have a reservation about it, so at least being able to show it's not gonna cause harm. And I think, at least in an Ontario context, but hopefully beyond, it's a unique opportunity for more integrated crop livestock systems, which I know we've gone away from in the past, but for environmental and now maybe economic reasons, we may be coming back to. So with that, just a few acknowledgements. I've worked with Donna Hancock. She's a forage technician at Guelph for as long as I've been there, but she's been there much longer and has a lot of experience and has helped with a lot of these experiments. A slew of summer students and graduate students, and then obviously the staff at the Beef Research Center and the Field Crops Research Station, and project collaborators listed here, and of course the farmers of the Living Labs project. So thank you for your attention. Thanks for listening. I'm not sure if there's time for questions or not, but.
Yeah, got a couple minutes for any questions if anybody has some.
Nancy?
Just a question about your fall cover crops. I noticed that your oats headed.
Okay.
When I did fall cover crops, I noticed that if I waited until the middle of August to plant my fall cover crops, the oats weren't induced to flower, and neither was my spring triticale. So I seem to get more growth because they weren't actually, so you wouldn't get a drop in your fruit protein that way. I just wondered if, for me, it was just kind of by accident.
Yeah.
Depending on the date in August I planted.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So a lot of people are trying to get their cover crop in as soon as possible after wheat harvest. There's always a question like, do people wait for that volunteer wheat to germinate and spray? I mean, it can be eaten as part of the forage too. I know, so they want to get those growing days in and increase the yield. I know one producer staggers the cover crop planting, like so that they have.
No, if you, because it's going to keep tillering, so I don't know if the yield goes up or down if
Right.
you don't actually produce heads. I don't know.
Right.
Have side-by-side comparison.
Yeah.
Get more regrowth if they don't head because they're not.
Well, yeah, okay, so we did graze the first round before they went to head. The vegetative. Yeah. Yeah, no, we could chat more. I'm not sure either, but yeah.
Just to answer that question, when barley, the volunteer barley regrowth,
Right.
Last October, it was really warm and it bolted and it did go to head.
Okay.
Even though it was on PEI, it was combined the end of August, it still bolted and went to head.
Right. So, yeah, I think.
Usually
I don't know. I think sometimes grazing like before it's bolting, right? Like, then you might get that keep the quality, but then maybe you're losing a bit of yield. So I don't know. It kind of depends, like what animals you're targeting to feed. If you were going to try grazing cover crops and you were dairy, you probably want the highest quality you can get. But if you were some of the beef and sheep producers, they don't not saying they don't care about the quality, but it's less of a priority and they just want that one grazing, and yeah. As long as they can, they'll graze into January even sometimes on cover crops. So.
What's the palatability difference between the rye, the triticale, and the oats?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure, but I mean, oats are quite palatable. Between the fall rye and triticale, I mean, they eat them both when they're in the vegetative state, and obviously they'll eat them if they're forced to beyond that. But I don't have data on it, but I think the triticale, it maintains its, like it matures later, so it just maintains its quality and likely palatability then a little bit longer. Fall rye, it's like you've got a 2-week window almost there. It's like, okay, now it's like, it grows a lot and fast all of a sudden, right? So, yeah.
Just on that note, why going so fast? Do you have any issues grazing in the spring?
The first year, I mean, yeah, we couldn't get out. I think we still got out around May 11th, but that was because we had a lot of rain then and the ground was wet. We probably could have got out, like, if the ground was drier, then we could get out like May 1st or something like that. But then, yeah, because you can only graze so much at a time, right? By some of it we didn't get to till June, and then it's like up to here and going to head, and then they kind of like eat everything around the edges, and then they're not really that interested in it after that point. The second year we did better at like putting more animals out and getting around to everything by the time before it was going to head, and then we did get a second grazing. So yeah, I think it does take a little bit of tight management at that time, but some people take it for silage too, right? Like, and that might be a more controlled way to do it, but yeah.
I assume the Legal brassica was like a daikon radish, like a village radish.
It's similar, but it's, I don't know, vivant variety of brassica. It's not a tillage radish, but I don't know. I guess I'm not a brassica expert, but it's a little different. We had one experiment, we kind of tried to compare the different brassicas and which species might be more palatable. So that was one, and I think the purple top turnip, but still in comparison to oats or peas, like, is avoided. Yeah.
They didn't eat it. It might be a bad thing because if it is still in the daikon, it's meant to go down.
Mm-hmm.
So designing our mixes with some of those in mind.
Yeah, it still had like a root, maybe not as long, but it still did. Yeah, and especially if compaction is a concern about grazing cover crops, then maybe having something in the mix that kind of offsets that. So yeah, except I know that, again, I'm not the animal science person, but I think like there's some concern, okay, all of a sudden about grazing only brassica because they leave them for last, right? So it's just, again, how you manage that you're not giving them too much all at once.
This drilling this, or is it broadcast straight out the bottom?
We drilled it, yeah. Is that it? I'll be around after. Yeah. Thank you.